Someone knocked on my window at 2 in the morning, and I want to be clear about what that means in a ground floor apartment, because it's not the same as a knock at the door. A knock at the door is someone at the threshold asking permission. A knock at the window is someone outside in the dark who already knows which room you sleep in. My bedroom window faces the narrow strip of concrete that runs between my building and the one next door, maybe 4 feet wide. A maintenance alley that nobody uses and nothing good ever comes down. Rain comes down it. Wind comes down it. Once a cat. Never, in the 2 years I'd lived in that apartment, had anything human come down it at night. And so when I heard the sound, 3 soft knocks, knuckles on glass, the careful kind that are trying not to be too loud, I went completely still under my blankets, like an animal that hopes stillness will make it invisible. My first thought, I should say, was not that it was a person. My first thought was raccoon or tree branch, or the building settling in some new way. My second thought was that raccoons don't knock, and tree branches have a different rhythm, and the building had never settled in a pattern that sounded like counting. 1, 2, 3, a pause. 1, 2, 3. By my third thought, I was sitting up in the dark, very still, very quiet, listening. Then I heard her voice, just above a whisper, just enough to reach through the glass. Jess, please, it's Kara. Don't turn on the light. Don't look outside your window, no matter what. Please just listen to me. Lani sam inside that danin sani mons. Lani min tanun sam pains danin min tlil min pibon planin san tanin wan sam don slen sam on button tam send. If she'd knocked on my front door and said those things, I'd have been afraid for her and opened the door. But she hadn't knocked on my front door. She'd come through the alley to my bedroom window at 2 in the morning, and the instructions she led with were instructions designed to protect me from seeing something, and that combination of facts told me more than any words she could have said after. Kara was in the alley. There was something in the alley with her that I should not see. And she'd come to my window rather than a front door, which meant the front of the building was not where she wanted to be. I lay there in the dark and I didn't move. Jess, are you awake? I need you to call someone for me. I can't call from inside. Just call. Don't look outside, okay? Just call. Getting up wasn't a decision I made consciously. My body made it first, the way bodies make certain decisions when the brain is still running the options, a physical understanding that staying in bed was not going to be possible, regardless of what the afraid part of me wanted. Bare feet on cold floor, dark room. Her voice barely audible through the glass and the darkness between us. Before I take you into what happened next, let me ask you to subscribe quickly, because the rest of this story is about what I did and didn't do over 8 months. And if you've ever gone quiet about something you weren't sure was your business, this is the story I needed someone to tell me. Subscribe, stay close, I'll take you through all of it. My name is Jess, 28 years old that spring, renter of a ground floor apartment in Columbus, Ohio, owner of one plant that was slowly dying, and one opinion about my neighbors, which was that the less I knew about them, the more peacefully I could pretend I lived alone. Before her, it was a retired man who watched television at a volume that moved through the drywall, and a couple who fought and made up in equal measure, and a series of short-term renters who left boxes in the hall. I'd learned the texture of each of them through the wall, the way you learn the sounds of a building you sleep inside, passively, unwillingly, with the resigned knowledge that your home is not actually sealed from the lives happening on the other side of it. And I'd learned, because I had to let each sound wash through me without sticking, without accumulating into a picture of a person I'd then have to worry about. Kara had been my neighbor for 8 months. In 8 months, I had learned her name, her approximate schedule, the sound of her footsteps, which were light and quick in the morning and slower and heavier late at night. I'd learned that someone with a lower, heavier tread visited on and off and sometimes stayed and sometimes left at odd hours. And I'd learned the sound of voices through the shared wall, rising and falling, and I had trained myself to stop listening when the voices got sharp, because none of it was my business and all of it made my stomach hurt. I had trained myself so well that I had developed a real skill at it, the not listening, the comfortable management of what I chose to know. What I could not have told you, in those 8 months, was whether Kara was okay. What I can tell you now is that she wasn't, and I knew it. The way you know things you've decided not to look at directly. A peripheral knowledge, present and unacknowledged, filed away somewhere you never have to open. I'd been honing that skill for 2 years by the time Kara moved in next door. Before her, it was a retired man who watched television at a volume that moved through the drywall, and a couple who fought and made up in equal measure. And I'd learned, because I had to let each sound wash through me without sticking, without accumulating into a picture of a person I'd then have to worry about. Gayam had been my neighbor for 8 months. In 8 months, I had learned her name, her approximate schedule, the sound of her footsteps, which were light and quick in the morning and slower late at night. Someone with a lower, heavier tread visited on and off, sometimes staying, sometimes leaving at strange hours. Voices came through the shared wall, rising and falling, the rhythm of argument without the words, which your brain fills in and always imagines worse than what was actually said. I had trained myself to stop when the voices rose, reaching for my phone playlist, turning it on low, making a cup of tea, thinking about something else until the sounds changed or stopped. 30, maybe 40 times in 8 months. Each time, a deliberate choice not to accumulate what I was hearing into a picture that would require me to do something. I got very good at this, so good that I can tell you, now, that I could not have told you then whether Kara was okay. She wasn't. And I knew, the way you know things you've decided not to look at directly. A peripheral knowledge held carefully out of the center of your sight so it never quite becomes information. That night, she forced me to look at it directly. Kara was my neighbor from the apartment beside mine. A woman I knew well enough to wave to and sometimes swap packages with when the delivery driver got confused. Maybe 35, quiet, worked odd hours. She smiled with just her mouth, which I'd always taken as shyness. Looking back, I understand it differently. She'd been managing something for a long time, and the particular management of it had made her careful with what her face gave away, including warmth. What she aimed at the hallway was the surface, and I'd been content with the surface, because the surface was all I'd asked for. Jess, please. I got up. I went to the window, and I did not pull the curtain. I talked to her through it. Kara, I hear you. I'm here. What do you need? Call 911. Tell them. She stopped, listened for something, then, very fast and very quiet. Tell them there's a domestic disturbance at this address. Tell them the man is inside and he has a knife and she needs help immediately. Don't say my name on the phone if you can help it. Just the address. Can you do that? My hand was already on my phone. I'm doing it right now. Are you safe where you are? For now. Go. Call. I called. I moved to the bathroom. Door closed. Told the dispatcher the address. The words she'd given me, repeated them, gave what details I had, stayed on the line the way you're supposed to. The dispatcher was calm, the way they always are, which I find more frightening than the alternative, because the calm is a skill they've had to practice, and the reason they need to practice it is that the things they hear are not calm. She told me units were on the way, told me to stay inside, asked if I could keep Kara on the line, and I said Kara wasn't on a line, she was outside my window. And there was a brief pause that told me that was unusual, even for them. And I stayed in the bathroom. That was what they told me to do. Stay inside, units are on the way, don't go out, don't open the window, don't engage. All reasonable things, all things I intended to do. Staying in the bathroom was one of the hardest things I've done, not because I was brave and wanted to do something heroic. I want to be clear about that. I was not feeling brave. I was standing on cold bathroom tile in my socks, holding a phone. And what I felt was a very pure and terrible helplessness, the kind that comes from having handed off an emergency to the right people, and now having absolutely nothing to do but wait and listen and not know. Every sound from outside was a piece of information I couldn't interpret. Silence was worse than sound. Silence could mean anything. I counted seconds. I know that's not useful information, but it's what I did. A number in my head, steady, the way I imagine you count when the doing of anything else is unavailable to you. I got to 140 before the thing happened that brought me back to my bedroom. A sound. Fast, close, from the alley. Something that wasn't wind. And I did the one thing every instinct I had was telling me not to do. I went back to my bedroom. I crossed to the window, and I slowly pulled back the edge of the curtain, just enough to see, just a sliver, just to know. I've tried, in the months since, to explain what I saw and what it made me feel. And I've never quite landed on the right words, because the right words would require me to separate the image from the shame, and I can't separate them. They're one thing. What I saw was Kara, in the alley outside my window, crouched against my building's wall, about 8 feet from my window, making herself small in the dark. She'd tucked herself into the corner where my building met the concrete fence, as small as a person her size could make herself, her arms around her knees. Her face was turned slightly toward my window, which meant she could not see what I was seeing, which was that the man was closer now than when she'd described him. He was at the mouth of the alley, maybe 20 feet, with the pale light of a phone screen moving over his face as he looked at it, and looked up, and looked at it again, like a man running a search, and the knife she'd told me about catching what little light there was when he shifted his grip. Because fear sharpens everything the way nothing else does. I can tell you the color of his jacket. I can tell you which hand held the phone and which held the knife. I can tell you that Kara's shoulders were shaking slightly, a controlled trembling, the kind that comes from cold and adrenaline, and the effort of being very still when every part of you wants to run. I can tell you all of this because I stood there for probably 10 seconds before I let the curtain fall. In those 10 seconds, two things happened at once. Fear for her, real and immediate. Adrenaline all the way to my fingertips, and underneath it, an older, colder thing, a recognition arriving without my asking for it, that I had been 3 feet from this situation for 8 months, that the wall between us had not, at any point, been soundproof, that I had heard this situation, in pieces, on 30 or 40 different nights, and I had reached for my playlist, not maliciously, not with the clear knowledge that I was choosing her harm over my comfort. Just the small daily choices of a woman who had gotten very good at not knowing, stacking on top of each other, invisible in their individual smallness, enormous in their sum. I let the curtain fall, went back to the bathroom, told the dispatcher I could see both parties, gave positions, updated what I had, kept my voice steady through some mechanism I can't explain, waited. What I was waiting for, beyond the sirens, was a verdict I was rendering on myself, quietly, in a bathroom at 2 in the morning, and I've been living with that verdict ever since. It's not the worst verdict, I answered the window. I made the call. She's okay. But it doesn't start at the window, the story of who I was as a neighbor to Kara. It starts 30 or 40 evenings earlier, with a playlist and a cup of tea. And that part is mine too, and I don't get to leave it out just because it ends with the right thing happening. Sirens came inside of 4 minutes. 4 minutes is not long in most circumstances. 4 minutes is the length of a song, a commercial break, the time it takes to heat a cup of coffee, crouching against a wall in a dark alley in the cold with a man 20 feet behind you. 4 minutes is a specific kind of forever, and I know that now in a way I didn't know it before. In my body, in the part of me that was counting seconds in a bathroom while she was counting them in the dark. I will never again hear the word minutes without feeling the weight of what they cost in different situations. I heard the units arrive from inside, the change in the street outside my front windows, and then voices, and then the particular commotion of a situation being contained rather than unfolding, and then a quiet that was different from the earlier quiet, a resolved quiet instead of a held breath quiet, and then a knock at my front door that was a police officer asking if I was the one who called, and I said yes, and I stood in my doorway in the cold entry air and gave them what I had. By the time I finished talking to them and closed my door and sat down on my own kitchen floor, it was around 3 in the morning, and I was shaking in a way I hadn't let myself shake while there were things to do. Not crying, just shaking, the whole body doing what adrenaline does when it finally gets permission to leave. I sat on my kitchen floor and let it go through me. At some point I made tea I didn't drink. I thought about a dozen things in no order. The color of his jacket, the playlist I'd been making for 8 months, the sound of her voice saying just call, the way she'd said for now when I asked if she was safe, the specific economy of those 2 words from someone who'd been managing threat assessment for a long time and knew how to be precise about what she knew and didn't know. For now. Not yes. For now. She was okay, not fine. Okay and fine are different countries, and she was in the first and not the second. She was at the hospital by 4 in the morning, and I found out she was there because her phone was finally working again, and she sent me a text that said, "I'm okay. Thank you for answering. Thank you for answering." I read that in my kitchen at 4:30 in the morning, with the kind of tiredness that lives behind your eyes, and I thought about all the nights I hadn't answered, not in a literal sense, but in the sense that mattered. The sounds I'd heard and chosen not to hear, the volume I'd turned up at just the right moment, the skill I'd built over 8 months of being a neighbor who didn't know things, and I thought about how, if I'd kept that skill sharp just a little longer, if the knock had come on a night when I was sleeping more deeply, or when I'd simply decided that a sound in the alley wasn't something I needed to get up for, the text might never have come. 4 minutes of silence instead of 4 minutes of sirens, and then nothing. She'd come to my window because it was the only window she trusted. She'd told me not to look because she'd been afraid that if I saw what was happening, I'd do something that would change what he did, and what he was doing, right then, was standing still, and she was desperately hoping he'd keep doing it. She'd been making calculations in a dark alley, threat assessments in real time, deciding what she needed from the one person close enough to reach, and what she decided was that she needed a phone call. Not a witness, not a scene, just a call. She'd been thinking more clearly than I had, from a crouched position in the cold, 8 feet from a man with a knife, than I had been from my warm bathroom. I went to the hospital that morning. Not because I was hurt, because she was, and because I needed to do something with the night I'd just had, and she seemed like the right direction to aim it. Sitting in my apartment with the knowledge of what had been happening 3 feet through my wall for 8 months was not something I could do with the volume turned down. Not anymore. She was in a room on the second floor, and she was awake, and she looked like she'd survived something, which she had. I won't describe what she looked like beyond that, because it belongs to her, and she didn't give me permission to hand it out. What I'll tell you is that she looked like a person who was going to be okay, and who knew it, which is not the same as a person who was okay, not yet, but knowing it is the first step, and she was on it. We talked for a long time in that hospital room, Kara and I. The way you sometimes talk to people you don't know well, when the ordinary padding of social life has been stripped away by circumstance, and you're just two humans in a room together with something real between you. She told me about the 8 months, not in detail, just the shape of it, how it had started and how it had changed, the slow way these things shift from something you think you can manage into something that has swallowed the exits one by one without your quite noticing until you're looking for the last one. She talked about it with a kind of clarity that people sometimes have right after something big, when they can see the whole picture in a way they couldn't from inside it. And then I told her about the wall, about the sounds I'd heard, about getting better at not listening. Bahadamasin that sing meditan haram memamentation, nintian pranara the pauk, porum, think men. I told her I'd heard things that made me uncomfortable, and I'd chosen, consistently, to interpret them as none of my business, and I was sorry. And I didn't know if sorry covered it, but I needed to say it. That night, she was quiet for a long moment, long enough that I didn't know what was going to come out of it. Then she said, I didn't want you to know. I want you to remember that. When you were turning the volume up, part of what you were doing was what I needed you to do. I wasn't ready for anyone to know. I've sat with that a long time. It's true, and it's also not the whole truth. And I think she knew that too, and I think we both let it be partly true, and left the rest of it in the room, because the rest of it doesn't have clean edges, and hospital rooms are not the place for things without clean edges. You should have been able to knock on my door, I said eventually, before it got to an alley. Yes, she said, I should have. And then, quietly, you should have left the door open a little more. We both nodded. That's the closest we got to the center of it. You should have left the door open a little more. That sentence has been living in me ever since. Because it's the whole thing, really, the whole lesson of that night, compressed into 10 words she said to me in a hospital room the morning after a 2 a.m. knock on my window. She's okay. I want to say that plainly before I tell you the rest. She moved out of that apartment 6 weeks later and gave me a forwarding address and a real hug at the door, the kind with some weight in it, and she's okay, building the slow, ordinary life you build on the other side of these things. Last I heard she was working somewhere new, and living somewhere smaller, and sleeping better than she had in a year. I got a card from her at Christmas, just a small one, a winter scene, a few words inside, and I kept it on my refrigerator until it started to curl at the edges, and then I kept it in a drawer. I found out the details of the 8 months slowly, the way you find them out when you're not family and not the victim, in pieces, careful fragments that I didn't push for but that came to me over time. He had been her boyfriend since before she moved in. The apartment had been a fresh start that he'd followed her into, a pattern she'd seen play out before and believed was ending, the way people believe things are ending when what they really mean is they can't see where the end is yet. The sounds I'd heard through the wall in those 8 months were the full story of that, and I'd heard most of it and registered it at the level of a problem I was choosing not to have. She'd gotten out a window the night of the knock, not my window, her own, on the other side, facing the alley, after he'd blocked the front door. She'd gotten out with no shoes and a dead phone, and nowhere to go except toward the one light she could see in the alley, which was the light I'd left on in my bedroom because I sleep with a nightlight, a detail so small and so accidental that I can barely stand to think about it. My nightlight was on. She'd oriented on it the way you orient on any light when you're in the dark. I went to the hospital the morning after, because I needed to do something with what I was carrying, and she seemed like the right direction to aim it. She was awake in a room on the second floor, and she looked like a person who had survived something, which she had, and I won't describe the rest because it belongs to her. What I'll say is she looked like a person who knew she was going to be okay, which is not the same as being okay, but is a necessary step toward it. We talked for a long time, the way you talk to someone when the normal social cushioning has been stripped away and you're just two people with a night between you. She told me the shape of the 8 months, not every detail, just the architecture of it, how it started, and how gradually it had grown walls until she was living inside something she hadn't consented to entering. I told her about the wall, about what I'd heard and what I'd done with it, which was nothing, and I said it as plainly as I could because she deserved the plain version and not the one I'd dressed up to make myself feel better. She was quiet a long moment. Then she said, "I didn't want anyone to know. When you were not listening, part of that was what I needed." And then, after another pause, "But you should have left the door open a little more." Not angry, just true. You should have left the door open a little more. I've been living inside that sentence ever since, because it contains everything: what I did wrong, what she needed, why the two things aren't exactly the same, and what the answer is. Not a thrown open door, not surveillance, just a crack, a light on in the window, a slightly lower volume on the television. The door left open a little more. She'd come to my window because it was the only window she trusted. She'd told me not to look because she'd been afraid that if I saw what was happening, I'd do something visible, something that would change his calculation, and what he was doing right then was standing still and looking at his phone, and she was desperately hoping he'd keep doing it. She'd been making threat assessments in real time, in a dark alley with bare feet on cold concrete, deciding what she needed from the one person close enough to reach, and what she decided was that she needed a phone call, not a scene, not a witness, just a call. She'd been thinking more clearly than I had, from a crouched position in the cold, than I had from my warm bathroom. That's something I think about. Here's what I want to tell you, and I want to say it without dressing it up, because dressing it up would be a kindness I don't deserve on this particular point. Every apartment building, every row of houses, every block in every city has a Kara in it somewhere, a person managing something behind a wall that the rest of us have gotten very good at not hearing. Not because we're cruel, because unhearing is easier than knowing, and knowing is easier than doing something, and doing something costs time and awkwardness and the risk of being wrong, and so we build the skill of comfortable distance and we call it minding our own business, and we keep the volumes on our televisions at just the right level. I know this because I did it for 8 months. I know it from the inside. I know the exact shape of the reasoning, the way you tell yourself that you don't know the situation, that couples argue, that you could be misreading a sound through a wall, that she's a grown woman who can handle her own life, that the last thing you want is to make it worse by getting involved when it's not your place. Every part of that reasoning is real. Every part of it is also a story you tell yourself so you don't have to feel what you'd feel if you let yourself know. None of us planned to be the neighbor who didn't help. We're all just the neighbor who didn't hear. I know what happened to him legally, because Kara told me, and because I gave a statement. He was charged, and he pled, and he's somewhere in the system now, and I won't pretend that feels like resolution, because resolution is not what this kind of thing gives you. What it gives you is an absence of the worst outcome, and a slow education in everything that led to it. The legal outcome is the smallest part of what I think about. The larger part is a playlist on my phone that I deleted about 3 weeks after that night. Not dramatically, not in a cathartic gesture, just one afternoon when I opened it and couldn't look at it anymore. I built it to help myself not hear things. I deleted it so I'd have to. None of us planned to be the neighbor who didn't help. We're all just the neighbor who didn't hear. I moved apartments a few months after that night. New place, different building, 3rd floor this time, with a window that faces a courtyard instead of an alley. From it I can see 6 other windows, lit and dark in various combinations, lives going on behind glass that I can see the light of but not see into. Some nights I stand at it for a minute before bed, looking out, and I think about who's on the other side of those windows, what they're carrying, what they're managing, what sounds are coming through walls that their neighbors have learned not to hear. At my old building, there was a woman named Adele on the 3rd floor. I learned her name after Kara moved out, in the way you start paying attention once you've learned the cost of not, who used to stand in the elevator looking at the floor and never answer when you said good morning. I used to take that personally. Now I hold the door a beat longer than I need to, and I ask how she's doing, and I mean it, and a few months ago she started answering, and then one day she didn't look at the floor. These things take time, but they take less time when somebody stops practicing not seeing. I don't do anything with that thought most nights. Most nights it's just a thought, a moment of honest attention, and then I go to bed. But I've stopped building the skill. I've stopped getting better at not knowing. When something comes through my walls and it makes my stomach hurt, I let it make my stomach hurt now, and I sit with it, and I ask myself what I'd want someone to do if the walls were reversed, if I were the one on the other side of it with nowhere to go and one window with a light on. Most of the time, what I want somebody to do is exactly what Kara asked of me. Not storm in, not make a scene, not assume they know the situation, just answer the window when I knock. Leave a light on so I can find it, pick up the phone and make the call. That's it. That's the whole thing. That's what being a neighbor actually means, when it means something real, not surveillance, not intervention, not the removal of anyone's privacy or dignity. Just a light on and a window you answer. Just the door left open a little more than you usually keep it. Just the decision, made quietly and without fanfare, to stop practicing not knowing. Kara knocked on my window because she trusted that I'd answer. My nightlight was on because I happened to sleep with one. Neither of those things was anything I planned, and an enormous amount was riding on both of them. That's the fragility of the system as it currently exists, and the only way I know to make it less fragile is to be less accidental about it. Leave the light on purpose. Practice answering instead of practicing not hearing. Make it slightly less likely that the person running out of options lands in a dark alley, hoping your bedroom nightlight happens to be on. I want to spend the rest of my life being worth that. If this story sat somewhere in you, subscribe, because someone in your life right now needs you to be the kind of person who answers the window when someone knocks. And drop a comment below about a time you heard something and didn't know whether it was your place to say something, because I think that's the question most of us are sitting with and pretending we're not. And it helps to know you're not the only one. I'll read every one of them. People who've been on either side of that wall, the one who heard and said nothing, the one who knocked anyway, always have the most to say. And there are more of you out there than any of us ever let on. There's also this: if you are Kara right now, or someone close to it, please know that the window you need to knock on exists somewhere near you. A domestic violence hotline can be reached at 1-800-799-7233 any hour of the night, and they are people who have made it their whole job to answer. You don't have to find the window with a light on by yourself. Call. Someone will pick up. Leave the light on tonight. You never know whose alley it faces. 8 months of a playlist. 30 or 40 evenings of tea I made to give my hands something to do that wasn't picking up a phone. I've been honest with myself since about what those evenings added up to. Not innocence, not ignorance, but a sustained choice not to know, made again and again with the full understanding that something was happening on the other side of the wall. The choosing not to know is the thing I sit with more than anything else about that night, because it's the thing most in my control and the thing most obviously wrong. And it's also the thing that I suspect is quietly happening right now in hundreds of thousands of apartments between neighbors who have gotten very good at the comfortable distance and have never asked themselves what they'd want if the walls were reversed. Because here's the thing about the comfortable distance. It feels like wisdom until one night it shows you its cost, and by then the cost is already paid. Stop building it. Leave the door open. Answer the window. That's the whole thing. Stop building it. Leave the door open a little more. Answer the window. Kara is okay. She's somewhere right now, sleeping through the night, in a place he doesn't know. And her phone is hers, and her time is hers, and nobody is into the alley outside her window. That's the version of her life that exists because a light was on, and a neighbor answered. Keep your light on, keep answering. The person who needs it may never tell you they needed it, but they will know. And somewhere in the accounting of things, so will you.